In the days of Jesus, there was a group of men called the Sadducees. They posed the question this morning. They were the professional clergy of that day. They were the priestly caste, very important, very influential, very wealthy. The Sanhedrin, that's the Jewish court in the days of Jesus, were made up primarily of Sadducees. And the chief priest of the Sanhedrin was appointed chief priest by the Roman procurator. So this group of Sadducees were paid by the Roman government to control the Jews in Jerusalem and to control the temple. So they were very much in league with the Roman thought, because the Romans were the ones that paid them. Be very careful about the people who pay you, because you have to please them. I always think about that with us priests. You pay me, so I can't, So the Sadducees were that class. In today's world, I would be a Sadducee. Now, there was a second group called the Pharisees. You all know about that. And they usually get a bad rap, but they weren't all bad. But the Pharisees were lay people who studied the Scriptures. Now, the Sadducees only accepted the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, as the Word of Moses, the Word of God. They would accept nothing else, and whatever was written in Torah had to be explicit. Now, the Pharisees accepted an ongoing revelation of God's will. They accepted the Proverbs and the Psalms and the wisdom books and so on. They were lay people who studied the Bible. Now, any of you that are in a prayer group that studies the Bible, you would be the modern-day Pharisees. And they clashed because they had a difference of opinion. And today it centers on the resurrection. There is no explicit reference to the resurrection in the Torah, the writings of Moses. That came about later. The first reading today from Maccabees, that's 100 or 200 years before Christ. The idea of a life after death, some kind of a resurrection, we call it, only appeared 100 or 200 years before Jesus, and something that most of us think about. Most people, even if you're not religious, believe that when this life is over, somehow life continues in some form. So that was the debate. And then Jesus turns the tables on them, because he said, even in the Torah, God is talked about as the God not only of the dead, but of the living, because Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were dead, but for God, they're alive. Time, for instance, that's a human invention. There is no time with God. With God, there is no death. Death is another human invention. Because for God, we are alive, and so are all who have died. They're alive with God. So that's what Jesus was talking about in the conversation with the Sadducees. Now, as I said earlier, Benjamin Franklin said there's nothing more certain than death and taxes. And so toward the end now of our liturgical year, we're asked to think about the end of our lives. We're asked to think about death, and that makes a lot of people nervous. But the old saying is, young people never think about death. Old people never stop thinking about death. So that's where, now what's the resurrection like? See, most of us think of resurrection or heaven in earthly terms. How do you imagine heaven? Well, you can't, because a resurrection is not resuscitation. After we die, we are not brought back to this life, even though we can only think about heaven in terms of what we know. That's why we talk about in heaven that you're going to be with your spouse, or you're going to be with your friends, or you're going to be with your pets. We can't think in those terms, but it's hard. How do you explain college to a preschooler? That's like trying to explain heaven to us. How do you explain a rose to the seed that brings forth the rose? Can't. And so what leads us then to one of our theories today, or our concerns, is our worries. You may worry about death. I would guess that most of us don't worry so much about death as how we're going to die. Or you might worry about your finances, your relationships, your job, your health, and you can add to the list. But that's what we're asked. I think it's impossible for us humans not to worry about something. I'm a worrier. I worry about everything. And when I don't have something to worry about, that worries me. That's just me. And I don't think it's wrong to worry. You hear people that say, well, if you worry, it's a sin. I don't think so. I think it's just being human. But what do you worry about? That's what we're called to think about today. And it's probably all of us that is different. But think about, and I'm sure you've already done this, things that you worried about last week, which never came, what you're worried about never happened. So it's a lot of wasted effort. And I think we all know that. I know that, but I still worry. So what's the solution? Well, the solution, as we are, Tom, if you'd hang that up for me. The solution is faith. That's what was evident in the second reading with Paul to the second letter to the Thessalonians. To believe that somehow God is with us. And I would guess that most of us had that experience, where you had a problem in the past, and you had no idea how you were going to solve this problem. But somehow it worked out. And you may even have said to yourself, I didn't do that alone. Somebody was with me. Well, that's believing that God is with us, because God is with us. That's the ultimate message of Jesus, that God made a bond with us humans through the birth, the death, the resurrection of Jesus, a covenant with us that can never be broken. God will never abandon us. So we do have faith. And I'm sure a lot of times we don't even realize how much faith we have. I always think about, if you want to know what faith is, drive down a 2-lane highway at 60 miles an hour, meeting other traffic going 60 miles an hour. That's an act of faith, because you believe they're going to stay there, and they believe you're going to stay here. That's faith. Now, the deeper message is that so often faith comes to us in other people. Tom, you want to hang that up? Faith comes to us in other people. How? Well, think of the scenario that you're sick, and somebody comes to you and just sits with you. They don't say much. They're just there. They may hold your hand, or they may not. But somehow, you sense some, I don't know what to call it, greater power, greater magnitude, a greater love that calms your spirit. That's God. That's how God operates. I've said this so often to you. You want to know what God looks like? Turn and look at the person next to you. That's the presence of God. We don't realize it, because usually we know their faults. And we think, how can they be God if they annoy me? And because I'm not very pious, I always say, well, if you don't like that version, then check this side. But that's the presence of God. It's right there. But so often we miss it. I want to end with this little explanation from Winnie the Pooh, because I think this exemplifies what I'm talking about, if you want to look at the picture on the screen. Today was a difficult day, said Pooh. There was a pause. Do you want to talk about it? Asked Piglet. No, said Pooh after a bit. No, I don't think I do. That's okay, said Piglet, and he came and sat beside his friend. What are you doing? Asked Pooh. Nothing really, said Piglet. Only I know what difficult days are like. I quite often don't feel like talking about it on my difficult days either. But goodness, continued Piglet, difficult days are so much easier when you know you've got somebody there for you, and I'll always be there for you, Pooh. And as Pooh sat there, working through in his head the difficult day, while the solid, reliable Piglet sat next to him quietly, swinging his little legs, he thought his best friend had never been more right. If you have experienced that, that's faith. Faith that God is with you.
Thank you for watching this week's homily here at St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. We invite you to join us for liturgy any weekend that you might be in the area. You can contact us at mysaintelizabeth.com or on Facebook. Thank you very much.